DeGeneres, girl, this name keeps coming up in conversations that people used to whisper about, and now suddenly everyone is saying it out loud. Like, you know how someone builds this perfect image for years and then one day the cracks don't just show, they explode? That's literally what's happening here. So listen, the story really starts with one of those lines that sounds small, but once you sit with it, it's not small at all. People started pointing out Ellen's connections, like real connections, not just, oh, she met them once kind of thing. We're talking about her being in circles with names like Bill Clinton and George Bush, and both of those names have been mentioned around Jeffrey Epstein more times than anyone is comfortable with. Now, obviously, being in the same social circle doesn't prove anything, but it's the kind of detail that makes people pause and go, wait. And then on top of that, you've got voices from different angles, all kind of circling back to Ellen, not saying the same thing exactly, but pointing in the same direction. That's what's making people uncomfortable. It's not one accusation. It's this pattern of, why does this keep connecting back to her? Because here's the thing. Ellen wasn't just a talk show host. She was the talk show host for over 2 decades. She basically owned daytime television. She had this brand, this image, this whole identity built around kindness. Be kind to one another. That was her thing. Every episode, same message, same smile, same warmth. And people believed it, like fully believed it. But then 2020 happened and suddenly former staff members started coming out, and not just one or two, multiple people from different roles telling similar stories about how toxic the workplace actually was. And the way people described it, completely opposite of the be kind image. That's when the first big shift happened in public perception. People started realizing that maybe the person on screen and the person behind the scenes weren't the same. And just as all of that was unfolding, something else was happening quietly in the background. Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested. July 2020, FBI shows up, takes her into custody after she'd been hiding for months following Epstein's death. And suddenly the focus wasn't just on Epstein anymore, it was on the network around him. Maxwell gets charged with recruiting and grooming underage girls. Heavy charges. And when the trial started moving forward, people weren't just asking, what did she do? They were asking who else was involved. Because during all of this, documents started surfacing. And one of the most talked about claims was that there were around 25 individuals connected to Epstein who were protected through secret settlements, like deals that never became public. And on top of that, 4 more alleged co-conspirators who were never even charged. Now think about that for a second. That's not a small number. That's a whole network of people who might have been connected, but somehow stayed out of the spotlight. And right around the time all of this legal momentum was building, Ellen's show just quietly ended. No big dramatic exit, no scandal being directly tied to that decision, just this soft, almost sudden shutdown. And of course, her explanation was simple. She said she'd been feeling creatively constrained, like she wanted to move on, which, okay, fair enough. People leave shows all the time, but the timing, that's what people can't ignore. Because it wasn't just random, it lined up almost too neatly with everything happening around Maxwell and the Epstein fallout. And then there's this one clip people keep bringing up. Maxwell, during a deposition, talking about someone whose story kept changing. Different versions, different timelines, never consistent. She didn't go into detail, didn't drop names clearly, but the way people interpreted it, they linked it back to Ellen. Now again, nothing direct, nothing confirmed, but it added fuel to an already growing fire because Maxwell, even with everything she's facing, has never really named names. That's what's so strange. You'd think someone in her position would start talking, right? But she hasn't. And that silence, it's making people ask even more questions, because if she knows something and she's choosing not to say it, then who is being protected and why? And to really understand how deep this whole thing goes, you have to look at Epstein's black book. This wasn't some internet rumor. It was a real contact list. Names, numbers, connections. It was recovered, documented, and eventually ended up in FBI hands after Epstein's former butler tried to sell it. That book had everyone in it: celebrities, politicians, powerful figures, names like Mick Jagger, Courtney Love, Prince Andrew, even Donald Trump before he was president. But here's the key detail people focus on. Some names were allegedly marked differently, circled, highlighted, like they meant something more. And the person who could have explained what those markings meant, He's gone. So now you've got the situation where the evidence exists, the connections exist, but the full explanation missing. And that's exactly where people like Joe Rogan step in, not with answers, but with questions that make everything feel even more uneasy. Ellen DeGeneres, see, this is where it starts getting even more uncomfortable, because once people begin connecting dots, they don't stop at one or two. They start looking at everything differently. And that's exactly what happened when Joe Rogan started talking about this whole situation on his podcast. Now you know how Joe is. He doesn't present things like a clean report. It's more like he's thinking out loud, throwing ideas, questioning stuff, sometimes joking, but there's always this layer where you're like, wait, why does that actually make sense? And that's what pulled people in. One of the things he brought up was honestly so random at first, but then it stuck. He mentioned how the only known witness from the 2017 Las Vegas shooting, a guy named Jesus Campos, gave one of his first major interviews, not to a serious news outlet, not to investigators on camera, but on Ellen's show. And people were like, why? Because think about it. That was one of the biggest incidents in recent history. And the first big sit down happens on a daytime talk show known for dancing games and giveaways. It didn't sit right with people. Not proof of anything, but definitely one of those moments that makes you pause. And once people paused, they didn't stop there. They started rewatching old clips, Ellen's interviews, her style, the way she interacted with guests. And suddenly things that once felt funny or harmless started feeling a little different. Take the Mariah Carey moment, for example. Remember when Ellen basically pressured her to confirm a pregnancy live on air? At the time, it was played off as a joke, like light teasing. But later, Mariah revealed she had actually suffered a miscarriage shortly after that appearance. And suddenly, that clip doesn't feel funny anymore. It feels invasive. Same thing with Martha Stewart, Katy Perry, multiple guests over the years. People started noticing a pattern. Ellen would push, not aggressively, but just enough to make people uncomfortable, just enough to get them to reveal something they maybe didn't want to. And that's where some of the more intense theories started coming in. There are communities online that have spent years analyzing Epstein's operation, and one term they keep using is social mapping, basically observing people, understanding their reactions, identifying their weak points, what makes them nervous, what they try to hide, what pressures them. Now, are people saying Ellen was doing that intentionally? That's where it gets controversial. Some say yes. Some say that's a huge stretch. But the reason the theory sticks at all is because the behavior matches in a weird way that subtle pushing, that careful probing, all happening in front of millions of viewers, but disguised as entertainment. And again, this is where Joe Rogan's influence made things bigger. He didn't accuse her directly. He didn't claim anything as fact. But he asked questions that made people uncomfortable enough to start looking deeper. Then there's the whole idea of facilitators, not just participants in powerful circles, but people who connect others, the ones who can put the right names in the same room. And when people look at Ellen's career, that's literally what she did for decades. She had access to everyone, celebrities, politicians, influencers. Her show was like a hub where powerful people crossed paths. And that's why her name keeps coming up in these conversations, not because of one specific thing, but because of the position she held. That level of access. Meanwhile, underneath all these theories and discussions, there's a very real and very heavy story that people keep coming back to. And that's the victims, especially Virginia Giuffre. Virginia was just 16 when she was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell. 16, she was working a normal job, and Maxwell approached her with what sounded like a simple opportunity: extra money, easy work. That's how it started. But we all know where that led. Virginia became one of the most prominent voices speaking out against Epstein's network. She testified, she went public, she named people, including Prince Andrew, who later settled her lawsuit. And then in 2025, she died. Official reports said it was suicide, but the timing, the circumstances, the fact that she had previously posted online saying too many powerful people wanted her silenced, it didn't sit right with a lot of people. Not at all. Because when you look at everything together, it's not just isolated incidents anymore. It's patterns, connections, silence, people with information not speaking, people who spoke out facing consequences. And all of this is happening while more and more attention is being put on the Epstein files. Because when Donald Trump made promises about releasing those files during his campaign, it brought the whole conversation back into the spotlight again. And right around that same time, Ellen DeGeneres left the United States, not temporarily, not like a vacation. She and Portia de Rossi reportedly moved to rural England, put their California property up for sale, and told people close to them that they weren't planning to return. Now, officially, the reason given was political. Ellen has been openly critical of Trump for years, so the explanation was that the election result influenced their decision to leave. And honestly, that explanation does make sense on the surface, but again, people are looking at the timing because it didn't happen randomly. It happened right as conversations about the Epstein files were gaining momentum again, right as Maxwell's legal team started bringing up those protected names, right as the pressure around that entire network started building. And that's why people aren't letting this go. Not because they have clear answers, but because too many things are happening at the same time for it to feel like coincidence. And the more people look, the more questions keep coming up. Ellen DeGeneres, at this point, it's not even about one accusation or one clip anymore. It's the overall picture that's making people uneasy. Because when you zoom out, you start seeing this pattern where things keep getting close to the surface and then suddenly stop. Take the way these cases usually play out. Look at Sean Combs, for example. His situation blew up publicly, headlines everywhere, serious allegations being talked about nonstop. But when it actually came down to legal action, people noticed something strange. The case narrowed, the focus tightened, and a lot of what was being discussed publicly didn't fully translate into what was actually prosecuted. And that's the pattern people keep pointing out. The spotlight hits one big visible figure, someone almost symbolic, and then it stops there. Like the system goes, this is enough, and the rest stays hidden. The deeper layers never fully come out. Now bring that back to Ghislaine Maxwell. She's serving a 20-year sentence in a federal prison in Texas. On paper, that sounds like justice, but when you really look at it, people question whether she's actually the end of the story or just the only one who got caught publicly. Because Maxwell was never the top. Everyone knows that she was connected, she was involved, but she wasn't the entire network. And yet she's the one sitting in prison while so many others remain unnamed. And what makes it even stranger is how quiet she's been. No big revelations, no public naming of names, nothing that really shakes the system. And people are asking why? Because someone in her position has every reason to speak if it could help her, unless staying silent benefits her more. That's the part that really gets people thinking, because if there are deals, protections, understandings behind the scenes, then silence isn't weakness. It's part of the arrangement. And while all of this is happening, the Epstein files themselves are still being processed. Millions of pages, documents, images, testimonies. It's not something that gets revealed overnight. It's slow, controlled, piece by piece, which means the full picture isn't out yet, not even close. And that's exactly why people are watching every move now, every decision, every relocation, every connection, because they're trying to read between the lines of what's not being said. So when Ellen DeGeneres quietly relocates to England, people don't just see a lifestyle change. They see timing, they see context. They see someone who was once at the center of Hollywood power suddenly stepping away at a moment when that entire world is being questioned. Does that prove anything? No. And that's important because a lot of what's being discussed right now lives in that space between confirmed facts and unanswered questions. But the questions themselves, they're not random anymore because you've got documented connections between powerful people. You've got verified cases like Epstein and Maxwell. You've got victims like Virginia Giuffre who came forward and paid a heavy price. You've got public figures like Joe Rogan amplifying conversations that used to stay hidden. And then you've got people like Ellen, whose name keeps appearing in discussions, not because of one direct claim, but because of proximity, influence, and timing. That combination is what keeps the story alive, because at the end of the day, this isn't just about Ellen DeGeneres. It's about a system, a network, a world where power, access, and silence all intersect in ways that most people never fully see. And the unsettling part, we're only seeing fragments of it. There are still names that haven't come out, still documents that haven't been fully understood, still connections that haven't been explained. And every time a new piece drops, it doesn't close the story, it expands it. So when people ask, is this over? The answer is no, not even close. The real question is what happens next. Because if more files come out, if more names get confirmed, if someone like Maxwell ever decides that staying silent isn't worth it anymore, everything changes overnight. Reputations, careers, entire legacies, and maybe that's why this story feels so tense right now. Because it's sitting right on the edge, not fully exposed, but not hidden anymore either. And when the next name finally drops,